Hey guys, today's story is about a not so great DM and a not so great player. So, to start off, I joined my buddy in a D&D campaign a little over a year ago, playing D&D 5e. My buddy was DMing, and the 5 players were all super green, running through MOP and all had a great time. We created some awesome backstories to our characters that we took into Storm King's Thunder, and ultimately took on a life of its own. I loved my paladin knight that was ultimately influenced by a dark dragon in exchange for power. This conflicted with the crystal dragon that gave power to another one of our party members. However, the two were close and worked well together. And despite the conflict, the party had a common goal. So let's talk about where it started to go wrong. We went through a couple of players dropping out due to life circumstances, and that was somewhere around the beginning of the campaign, number 2 out of 3. Work got too busy, and one moved out of state, and a replacement player was there for 2 sessions before he also had to quit. We replaced that player with a childhood friend of mine, and another with someone that I barely knew. The guy that I barely knew was invested enough in D&D, but we realized over time that he made extremely impulsive decisions at a moment's notice. This got us in trouble more than once and resulted in many very frustrating outcomes. Along with that, he would never fully read his spell or ability descriptions, and would constantly use things incorrectly, and if you let him know that he did something wrong, he would get very defensive and very upset. My older friend that joined was a combination of every bad player trait possible. He always wanted everything to be about him, but only when he wanted. He'd complain that we didn't include him in roleplay, but when we did, he would respond in riddles and tell you nothing, and then say that's how his character is. He'd never mention buffs to his dice rolls, but complain when we used them and didn't remind him on his turn. And he started huge arguments because he had ideas on how he wanted to do things, but he wouldn't mention them to the DM, and then made a huge stink about it with passive-aggressive attitudes. And after weeks of playing, he still didn't remember the rules of the game, or even what his own character abilities do. I lobbied to try to get this older friend removed from the campaign for months. Quite frankly, he made me miserable, and it seemed like no one else was too bothered by his outbursts. They'd always continue to give him chances, even after he made our DM completely livid. And by the time that we got through Storm King's Thunder, I was already starting to dislike my time with D&D. I still loved D&D, but I hated having to play with my old friend and the new guy. They were disruptive, and anything you said could immediately set them off. And now to the DM, who was my best friend. His first big act of ruining D&D for me was killing my character for story purposes. We knew ahead of time that one of us could die. No one ever said that they wanted to die, however. It's just something that he decided to go ahead with. And not only did he do so, but he did it within the first 30 minutes of a 5-hour session. He never told anyone to have a new character ready, as it was all a anything could happen scenario. So my character got killed. The character that effectively created the majority of our upcoming homebrew. And I'm just sitting there at the table, expected to roll up a new character really quickly. But I like to take my time creating characters, so I just headed off to bed. There was no D&D for me that week. And it didn't take me too long to figure out that no matter what we wanted to do with our characters, we were at the mercy of the DM. And he made sure to let us know that he's the DM and he makes all the final decisions. And if he wanted to, he would kill any of us off at a moment's notice. And he hated being corrected. You could politely remind him of something, but if you told him that he made a mistake, he would get upset with you. And another time when we were in combat, the DM was keeping track of initiative, except he didn't give us the full order of initiative, so we were waiting on our turns. Eventually, he told me that it was my turn, then said that it was actually someone else's turn. So then that someone else took their turn. And then another couple of people went, and then I finally asked him when I was going to take my turn. So he tells me that my turn had already passed, and I explained that I never actually got to act. So he got upset and told me not to blame him for missing my turn. This happened several times, and depending on how the DM was feeling at that particular moment, he would either let you take your turn, or tell you tough tinsel. He also had a tendency of forgetting modifiers on dice rolls, and even letting people re-roll if he was in the mood. It took me a while, but I realized that I wasn't having fun anymore, and D&D just ended up becoming a chore. A huge waste of time that I was hoping would end sooner than later. I stuck around as an obligation to my best friend, as we've always spent tons of time together, but in the last few months I've just realized that not only is his DMing style toxic, but so is his personality. The final straw was during our last session when I got up to take a leak. And the DM has made a stink before of people leaving the table, despite it usually being for drinks or, bathroom breaks or grabbing food that they ordered online, for maybe only a minute or two, max. But we were about to enter a new part of the dungeon, and I got up to take a leak, and I immediately heard one of the players calling for me, so I told them I would just be a second. I took care of business and came back in, and the DM's new puppy was overeager to get through the door, despite us keeping him out, and he squeezed himself in between the door and the wall as I was slow in closing it, as I was aware that he might dash through. This caused the puppy to let out a yelp, and as I was confused as to what just happened, I said, "What the heck?" out loud. The DM immediately flew into a rage about how I shouldn't be mad at the puppy, and that I should be checking to see if he's okay because I heard him. He was infuriated, and that upset me because I was startled by the dog yelping, and he made it seem like I hurt the dog on purpose. Then, as we started playing again, the new guy calls me a crapface and acts like I just ruined the entire game. Later on in that night, I was given a talking to which involved my best friend being extremely aggressive towards me. Because I'm always gone and I screwed with his dogs. I knew at that moment that the friendship was over. I understand interruptions in game flow can suck, but a 30-second delay to take a piss or grab a drink isn't exactly ruining anyone's game. And I just couldn't believe just how upset he was over me having an accident with his dog. We were going to play again the next week, and hopefully finish up the campaign, and I planned on taking my D&D belongings with me since I kept them there. But I wasn't able to make the game due to unexpected overtime. I told them that with all the overtime that I'm working, I'll no longer be able to play with them, and I haven't returned since. Unfortunately, I've got some cool D&D things that I left over there, just because I didn't really want to see this person again. I've played it off like I'm super busy with work, but the relationship is done by this point. It's kind of funny because my DM friend used to always say just how crazy D&D shows you how people really are. And you know what? He wasn't wrong. Well guys, you know what's worse than having just a bad DM? Having a bad DM and a pretty crappy player as well. I kinda feel like the DM started to not care about the actual rulings and just started hand-waving stuff to try to, be lazy and move things along. And as far as the dog freaking out thing goes, while the DM is a jerk, I've known a lot of people that will freak the ever-living hell out if you so much as breathe on their dog. So that part really doesn't surprise me at all. And as far as his stuff goes, and him not really being straightforward with this guy, I don't know if he's ever going to get his stuff back. He could come up with some sort of lie to try to get over there and just scrap his stuff, but I don't know. Depending on who this guy really is, he might not let this guy back into his house to get his stuff back, and might even be as petty to destroy it or throw it out or some such. I don't know. So, let me know what you guys think, and, as always, have a good one.